Lübeck, Germany, March 6, 1981. Silence fills the courtroom. The benches are full. At the stand, a man enters in handcuffs. A few meters away, Marianne Bachmeier, 30 years old, stares at him. In her handbag, a small pistol. In the blink of an eye, she stands, takes aim, and fires. From that moment on, Marianne Bachmeier becomes a national figure, dividing public opinion between those who support her and those who condemn her act. But what exactly drove her to such a decision? That's what we'll uncover today in our criminal case of the day. Warning, some content in this episode may not be suitable for younger audiences. Topics such as alcoholism, child neglect, and pedophilia are discussed purely for informational and awareness purposes. The Bachmeier family originally came from East Prussia. After World War II, when the region was taken over, they were evacuated to West Germany. And that's where Marianne Bachmeier's story begins. She was born in a refugee camp near Hanover on July 3, 1950, in a post-war Germany trying to rebuild itself. After its devastating defeat to the USSR, the country was in complete chaos. Poverty, shame, and hunger were everyday realities for most Germans. Like many others, the Bachmeiers suffered the consequences of a war in which they had played a controversial role. Marianne was raised in a very strict religious environment, but her parents' relationship was as dysfunctional as the times they lived in. Her father, a former Waffen-SS officer, narrowly avoided prison. After the fall of the Third Reich, he descended into alcoholism. He was prone to violent rages and regularly unleashed his anger on his wife and children. It was a deeply unhealthy and frightening environment, one that left a heavy mark on Marianne's early years. When her parents divorced, her mother remarried. Her new husband was no better than Marianne's biological father, just as domineering, violent, and unpredictable. He also suffered from OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, which manifested in a constant fear of germs and an extreme obsession with cleanliness and order. One of his most intense fixations was his garden. He wanted it spotless at all times and forbade Marianne from playing in it. Breaking that rule meant punishment. Clearly, Marianne and her mother had escaped one hell only to end up in another. Despite growing up in the stifling atmosphere with strict rules and emotional and physical violence, Marianne remained a free spirit. No one could change that, no matter how much conflict it caused at home. As a teenager, she longed to escape her dull little town, a place where nothing ever happened. She dreamed of far-off lands, of open-minded and warm people. As she began to grasp adult realities, she grew rebellious, outspoken, and unafraid to voice her beliefs. In the conservative bourgeois society of the time, this was seen as scandalous. A young girl was expected to obey, never question. When her mother remarried, Marianne refused to call the new man Dad. She insisted on calling him Uncle Paul. She didn't like him, and the feeling was mutual. Uncle Paul couldn't stand her rebellious attitude. He began beating her with his belt. Violence became a constant threat in the home. During those moments, her mother never stepped in to protect her. On the contrary, she always sided with the men in her life, never with her daughter. She saw Marianne as a burden, not a child to protect. "You're disturbing the peace in my household. You'll do as my husband says, or go live with your father if he even wants you," which I doubt. Still, Marianne was constantly searching for love, affection, and companionship outside her family because she'd never received any at home. But this wild, untamed personality would eventually backfire, leading her down painful paths, running away, toxic relationships, and soon, teenage pregnancy. At just 15 years old, she began her first real relationship with a boy named Herman, roughly the same age as her. What drew her to him wasn't his looks or personality, but the fact that he owned a motorcycle. In the 1950s and 60s, having a motorcycle was like owning a luxury car today. For Marianne, who'd always been denied life's pleasures, that bike represented more than just freedom of movement, it was a symbol of escape. Still, she kept the relationship secret. If her mother or stepfather found out, they would lock her in her room literally. Her stepfather enforced strict rules, including a strict 8 p.m. curfew. Because of that, Marianne developed the habit of sneaking out in the middle of the night once her parents were asleep. At 16, she became pregnant by her boyfriend. The news filled her with fear. She wasn't physically or emotionally ready to carry a pregnancy, and she had no loving family to support her or even tolerate her condition. She knew it would make them furious, especially Uncle Paul. She didn't even want to imagine what they might do if they found out. But like all secrets, the truth eventually came out. Marianne was immediately thrown out of the family home. Her mother made no effort to bring her back. As mentioned earlier, she always took the side of the men in her life, first the SS officer, Marianne's father, and now Paul. And just like that, Marianne found herself 16 years old, pregnant, vulnerable, homeless, and alone. No one was there to help or care for her. What happened next isn't well documented, but it's believed she stayed in a home for single mothers. In 1967, Marianne gave birth to a baby girl. Soon after, she placed the child for adoption. Not long afterward, Herman broke up with her. They would never see each other again. 2 years later, she returned to school. There she met a kind boy. Their relationship was as intense as it was short-lived, and once again she became pregnant. Marianne's situation was still unstable. She was homeless, with no support system, no one to rely on. Her future was too uncertain for her to consider keeping the baby. Her boyfriend was no better off. He was also squatting, barely surviving, let alone supporting a girlfriend and a child. To make matters worse, he left her soon after learning she was pregnant. Marianne felt like every person she ever trusted had used her and thrown her away. As her due date approached, she had no idea where to turn. When the baby was finally born, she gave the second child up for adoption too. In the meantime, she dropped out of high school without graduating. It was time to enter adult life. For the next 3 years, she lived on society's margins, her life chaotic and uncertain. No home, no money, no plans, just surviving day to day. But then fortune smiled on her. Still living in her hometown of Lübeck, she landed a job as a waitress in a bar restaurant called Tapasa. Fortunately, her employer agreed to rent her a small apartment located just above the restaurant. The bar had a strong hippie vibe, typical of the era. It was run down, almost unsanitary. The menu was basic and cheap. The customers were mostly students, unemployed people, and misfits. The pay wasn't great, but Marianne couldn't expect much more. Still, she grew to love the place. She found a sense of balance, warmth, and stability, things she had always desperately lacked. She loved working at the bar. The laid-back, friendly atmosphere of Tapasa and her daily interactions with customers gave her a sense of purpose. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Among the regulars, she found a network of people, a kind of chosen family who truly cared for her. Marianne blended perfectly into this new world. She quickly made friends with the regulars, everyone knew her, and genuinely liked her. Not long after, she started a romantic relationship with the bar's manager, a man named Christian. Soon after the relationship began, Marianne found out she was pregnant again for the third time. Christian had just turned 22, but he seemed older, as if he had already lived a full life. This time, however, things were different. Marianne was more mature. She had a steady job, a bit of money, and most importantly, a roof over her head. She was no longer in survival mode. She felt relatively happy, at peace, maybe even ready to become a mother. Another reason behind this decision was the deep grief she still carried after giving up her 2 previous babies. She couldn't go through that again. On November 14, 1972, Marianne gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Anna. At first, Christian promised to support them financially, but when faced with reality, he quickly changed his mind. He wasn't ready for that kind of long-term commitment. Marianne was deeply disappointed. She had hoped Christian would be part of their daughter's life. But what was the point of forcing him to stay if he didn't want to? So she made a firm decision. She would raise her daughter on her own no matter how hard it got, no matter how many bad days came. Before turning 24, Marianne underwent tubal ligation surgery. She didn't want to get pregnant again. She simply couldn't face the mental and physical toll anymore. She was done pleading with absent fathers or making impossible choices. Anna's arrival turned her mother's life upside down. From now on, everything revolved around her. But Marianne's financial situation remained fragile, and she had no one to care for the baby while she worked. She had no choice but to bring the bassinet to the bar with her. So Anna spent the first months of her life behind the counter at Tipasa. She quickly became the star of the place, passed from one set of arms to another, bottle-fed by students and bohemians, sung to with off-key lullabies, all to the background noise of blaring rock music. She became everybody's baby. A bar certainly wasn't the ideal place to raise a child, but Marianne felt that, all things considered, it wasn't so bad. Life was hard between long shifts, tight budgets, and loneliness, but she held on. Anna grew up in an alternative world, far from the bourgeois values her mother had long rejected. The hippie culture of the time played a big role in shaping that world. The little girl was lively, curious, and full of joy. She loved animals, stories, and afternoons by the Trave River. Mother and daughter shared a rare and powerful bond, something deeper than blood. As Anna started to grow, her mother slowly realized that the bar was no longer a suitable place for her. Still, she didn't do much to change the situation. Anna was exposed daily to a loud, chaotic environment filled with cigarette smoke and flowing alcohol. The customers swore freely and often spoke about explicit topics, completely unfiltered, as if the child weren't even there. She had become part of the background. While Marianne worked her shifts, she was always busy behind the counter. Keeping an eye on her daughter in those conditions was nearly impossible. As devoted and loving as Marianne was, she often forgot that Anna was just 6 years old. She didn't think twice when she saw her daughter chatting with men over 40, a pint of beer in their hand, not exactly a normal sight for a little girl. Marianne was so determined to give Anna the independence and freedom she herself had never known, that she downplayed the risks of this environment and the potentially harmful influence it might have on her. In short, she treated Anna more like a teenager, expecting her to be more knowledgeable, more resourceful, and more mature than her age allowed. Marianne also expected Anna to take care of herself, to prepare her own meals when her mother was out. It's true that Marianne lived a nocturnal life and rarely had time to fulfill the role of an ideal, attentive mother. As a result, Anna was forced to grow up too fast, exposed far too early to an adult world that didn't suit her. Even outside her working hours, Marianne often stayed behind at Tipasa, drinking with the regulars, instead of going home or taking her daughter to the park or the library. It was only after her shift ended, usually around 1 or 2 a.m., that mother and daughter would finally go upstairs to bed. On top of that, alcohol was always within reach because of her job, and Marianne never held back from drinking. Naturally, Anna fell into the same rhythm, living at night, sleeping during the day. People who knew Marianne Bachmeier at the time say she was fully aware of how difficult this life was for her daughter. She knew it wasn't ideal, but she simply didn't know how to balance her work with her role as a mother. She had no idea that life still had cruel surprises in store for her. It was May 5th, 1980, a day that began like any other. Marianne, now 29, was sleeping as usual after a long night of work at Tipasa. The night before, around 2 a.m., when she and Anna had gone upstairs to bed, an argument had broken out for reasons that remain unclear. The most striking and heartbreaking part is how an 8-year-old child could even have enough ground to argue with an adult. At that age, most kids throw tantrums, pout, act out, but they don't yet have the maturity to hold an actual argument. It said a lot about how quickly Annie had been forced to grow up. Her mother had always seen her as a miniature adult, an equal, never quite as a child. There had never really been a proper parent-child dynamic between them. That didn't mean there wasn't love. There was, even if it was never shown through words or affection. That morning, May 5th, Anna was the first to wake up. As usual, she got dressed, packed her school bag, made herself breakfast, and got ready to go. But this time she refused to leave. She was resisting. She wanted to show her mother just how upset she still was after their argument. Marianne, still groggy from the alcohol, gave in and let her do as she pleased. She had no idea her decision would be irreversible. Around 8 a.m., Anna left the apartment. She first went to a friend's house, but when she arrived, the girl had already left for school. That left Anna with an entire day to herself. She didn't really know how to spend it, so she wandered the streets, trying to entertain herself for a few hours. This was the early 1980s. No internet, no security cameras, no cell phones. Turning a corner, she crossed paths with a man. "Hey there," he said. "What are you doing all alone? Don't you have school today?" "No, I'm just walking around," she replied. They started talking. His name was Klaus Grabowski. He was 35 years old and worked as a butcher. Anna was surprised to learn that he lived just 200 meters from the Tapasa bar. They were neighbors. He, in turn, was slightly thrown off by how bold she was. He had never met a child who spoke with such confidence and poise. "I think I've seen you before at the bar, but we never talked," he said with a half-serious, half-amused smile. "Maybe. At Tipasa, everybody knows me," she replied. Klaus Grabowski let out a nervous laugh. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching. Then, leaning down, he whispered softly to the little girl, "Would you like to come to my place? I have a litter of adorable little kittens. You can even choose one to take home." Anna's eyes sparkled with excitement. She agreed without hesitation. She had no idea who she was really talking to. Later that day, she vanished without a trace. The man she had met, Klaus Grabowski, was not a stranger to the authorities. In fact, his name was already in the police registry. During the 1970s, he had been convicted several times for offenses involving minors. Although his past was troubling, he had never been involved in something as serious as what would happen that day. Anna would tragically become the first name in a much darker chapter of his story. Meanwhile, back at home, Marianne, still recovering from a long night at work, finally woke up in the late afternoon. She noticed that her daughter wasn't home, but didn't worry at first. After all, Anna was supposed to be at school. Marianne went on with her day. She did a bit of shopping, then attended a photo shoot for a magazine. She returned home later that evening. By then, Anna still hadn't come back. At first, Marianne assumed her daughter was playing at a friend's house and had lost track of time. It wasn't unusual, but by 8 p.m., with no sign of her, she began to worry. She went out to search, starting with the neighborhood, then walking through the city center. She scanned the faces of every little girl, hoping, fearing to see a familiar silhouette. She asked passers-by, shopkeepers, but no one had seen her. At first, frustration crept in. Maybe, she thought, Anna was just hiding out to make a point after their argument the night before. Maybe she was trying to teach her a lesson. But as the hours passed, and one by one, the parents of Anna's friends confirmed she wasn't with them, a terrifying realization began to take shape. Something was wrong. Very wrong. That night, Marianne went to the police to officially report her daughter missing. Search efforts began immediately through the night and into the following morning. But still, no trace of Anna. Then on the evening of the second day, a knock came at Marianne's door. A police officer was standing outside, his expression somber. He had devastating news. Earlier that day, a woman had walked into the Lübeck police station with information about Anna. It turned out that the woman who came forward was none other than Klaus Grabowski's fiancée. She told the officers that the previous night, when she came home, Klaus had been acting strangely. Something was clearly off. And then, at one point, he began talking. Too much. He confessed, she said. He told me that earlier that day he had lured a little girl into his home and that he had done something terrible. He went into detail, what he did, how he hid her, and where he left her. I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't be part of this. I had to come forward. It was through this testimony that the police discovered everything. And it was this same testimony that would soon destroy Marianne. The officer told her everything. The shock was unbearable. Marianne collapsed under the weight of the revelation, completely devastated. Her grief was mixed with anger, guilt, and confusion. She couldn't stop blaming herself. She kept thinking about that last conversation with Anna. They had argued. She thought her daughter was simply acting out. Now she knew the truth. Anna had skipped school that day and spent time wandering the streets, and that's how she crossed paths with the wrong person. While Marianne had been resting, her daughter was gone, and the last moment they had shared was an argument. That memory would stay with her forever. There would never be a chance to make peace, to hold her, to say goodbye. There was, however, one small thing that could still be done: justice. The authorities now had a name, an address, and a witness willing to take them directly to the suspect. And that's exactly what happened. On the evening of May 8, 1980, Klaus Grabowski was arrested. The investigation moved quickly and smoothly, a rare case where the suspect was identified and captured within days. Many cases like this can go unsolved for years, sometimes forever. For the public, the swift arrest was a relief, but for Marianne, it was a bitter kind of justice. At the police station, Grabowski confessed to everything, but gave a very different version of the events. He claimed that Anna had tried to blackmail him, that she threatened to tell her mother something unless he gave her money, and that, fearing the consequences, he panicked. Marianne was deeply offended by his words. She broke down. It wasn't just about losing her daughter anymore. It was about facing the full weight of monstrosity, injustice, and the irreparable. At that very moment, something inside her shattered for good. Eventually, Grabowski revealed the location where he had left Anna. For Marianne, it was like losing her child a second time. The guilt began to eat away at her, little by little, every single day. 2 days later, as she stood at the cemetery to choose a plot for her daughter's grave, the funeral director asked, "Would you prefer a single grave or a double one?" She replied without hesitation, "Double. One for Anna and one for me. I'll be joining her soon." When the trial of Klaus Grabowski opened in March 1981, Marianne was there every day. She listened to the clinical testimonies, to the cold, detached words. Grabowski showed no remorse. Each sentence spoken in court felt like another blow. Marianne had the growing sense that justice was happening around her, but not for her. She didn't feel heard, only tolerated. The prosecutors, the judges, the media, all seemed distant. Some even expressed sympathy for the man on trial. Her greatest fear was that he would receive a mere 10 to 15 years, maybe serve only 6 or 7, and walk away, to start over, as if nothing had happened. Anna, meanwhile, would never grow up, never fall in love, never travel, never laugh at 25, or dream at 30. For Marianne, even a guilty verdict wouldn't feel like justice. So she decided she would take matters into her own hands. She traveled to Hanover. There she bought a pistol, leaving her real name and contact information at the shop. She claimed to be a sports shooter, just looking to practice at the range. The shop owner didn't ask further questions. In reality, Marianne had never fired a gun before. She had no idea how to load or handle it properly. Back home, she took it out of its case, studied it quietly, and hesitated, her hands trembling. She still wasn't sure what she was going to do, but she was certain she'd do something. The rage was rising, quiet, absolute, uncontrollable. Then came the morning of March 6, 1981, the third day of the trial. Grabowski was sitting in courtroom 157 at the Lübeck Regional Court, talking to his lawyer. During a break in the session, Marianne entered the courtroom. She wore a beige trench coat, her hair tied back, her face pale, unreadable. She moved silently toward the defendant's box. Then, in a moment of chaos, she pulled a Beretta .22 from her pocket, took aim, and fired 8 times. 6 bullets struck Grabowski. He died on the spot. Marianne didn't flee. She stood still. No panic, no fear. Just a kind of tragic calm. A group of lawyers surrounded her. One of them wrestled the gun from her hand. Shortly after the shooting, she told reporters, "I wanted to shoot him in the head. Unfortunately, I hit him in the back. I hope he's dead." She offered no resistance when the police arrested her. Her act, filmed and broadcast around the country, sparked a national debate. Some saw her as a courageous mother, others saw a dangerous vigilante who took justice into her own hands. Marianne later explained her motive. "I heard he planned to make a statement, and I thought, here comes another lie about my daughter, about my child." Almost 2 years later, Marianne was back in court, this time as the accused. The question now was it premeditated murder or a crime committed under extreme emotional distress? Suddenly, she became the focus of intense media attention. She sold the story of her life to Stern magazine for 250,000 Deutsche Marks, money that would help cover her legal fees. A journalist, Heiko Gebhardt, was even granted special access to visit her in detention. Over 13 published episodes, readers learned the full story: her strict, religious upbringing, her father a former Waffen-SS officer, her first pregnancy at 16, another at 18, both children placed for adoption. Shortly before the birth of her second daughter, she suffered a traumatic assault. When Anna was born in 1973, Marianne was 23. She chose to raise this child herself. The case shocked, fascinated, and divided the entire country. Marianne Bachmeier became a national figure, a symbol of vengeance, a mother in mourning, or a dangerous outlaw. Germany was torn. Her trial, which opened on November 2, 1982, felt less like a hearing about one woman and more like a reckoning for an entire system. The prosecution insisted it was premeditated. She bought a weapon, lied to obtain it, entered a courtroom with it, and used it with intention. The defense pleaded trauma, mental collapse, and unbearable grief. The charge was initially murder, later reduced to manslaughter. The courtroom was packed. Many in the public believed the real failure had been the justice system, one that had allowed a known offender to walk free and later undergo treatments to restore his ability to harm again. Some began to question Marianne Bachmeier's credibility as a grieving mother. Critics accused her of having neglected Anna, of now trying to atone through vengeance. Others, on the contrary, expressed deep sympathy, seeing her act as one of desperate love and defiance. In the end, the court reached a verdict: voluntary manslaughter with mitigating circumstances. On March 2, 1983, Marianne Bachmeier was sentenced to 6 years in prison for unlawful possession of a firearm and intentional homicide. Initially charged with murder, her charges were downgraded under public pressure. She ultimately served 3 years, a symbolic sentence, some would say, enough to affirm that vigilante justice cannot be permitted in a court of law, but also acknowledging her extraordinary circumstances. After her release, Marianne vanished from public view. She left Germany, avoiding cameras, debates, and media appearances. In 1985, she married a teacher and moved with him to Lagos, Nigeria, joining a German expat community. But the weight of her past followed her there. The memories of Anna, the sorrow, the trauma, none of it had disappeared. The marriage ended in divorce 5 years later. Marianne then settled in Palermo, Sicily. There, she immersed herself in a new rhythm of life. She studied psychology and philosophy, painted, took photographs, and began to write. Her experience in Italy deeply inspired her, even leading her to write a reflective novel titled Palermo, Amore Mio. She gave a few interviews during this time, quiet, somber, and raw. She said she did not regret what she had done, but never glorified it either. She rarely spoke of Anna, but when she did, it was with painful tenderness. For her, there was no peace, only survival. In 1996, still living in Italy, Marianne was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She returned to Germany for treatment. Though she remained hopeful, the disease was terminal. In her final weeks, she allowed Lucas Maria Boomer, a journalist with NDR, to document her final days on camera. This decision stirred controversy. Many Germans accused her of seeking attention once again, of turning her final chapter into a public performance. They saw it as another attempt to stir public sympathy, at a time when public interest in her story had long faded. But for Marianne, it seemed to be an attempt at closure, or perhaps one last way to control her own narrative. She died in 2006 at the age of 46. According to her final wishes, she was buried next to her daughter in Lübeck. The story of Marianne Bachmeier is, above all, the story of a tragedy, but also of a moral dilemma. How far can a mother go to avenge her child? Where does justice end, and where does revenge begin? By ending the life of the man who took her daughter, Marianne crossed a line. But for many, she voiced something millions could only scream silently. Even 40 years later, her case continues to resonate in Germany. Beyond her many interviews, the case has been adapted into books and films. The journalist Heiko Gebhardt, who had access to her during her time in prison, published a book in 1984 titled Anna's Mother. That book inspired two feature films, released only months apart due to the huge media sensation. The first, Anna's Mutter, Anna's Mother, directed by Burkhard Driest, and the second, Der Fall Bachmeier, Keine Zeit für Tränen, The Bachmeier Case, No Time for Tears, by Hark Bohm,